Oh, okay.
Oh my god, I scared myself.
Sorry.
Oh my god.
Scare yourself.
I'm just gonna turn this down a little bit.
Can you see this? Yeah? Okay.
A bit higher? Yeah.
Can you see the sticks?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, interview with EK, take one, marker.
Okay. So do you just want to jump right into the question?
Sure.
All right. So, where were you born?
I was born in a hospital in London, Ontario, which was the closest sort of city to where I actually grew up, which was a town called Seaforth. It has a population of about 2,000 people, and it's on Highway 8 between Stratford and Goderich.
So, what kind of jobs did you have before writing?
Oh my goodness. I did a little bit of everything, I think. The only thing I've never done is I've never worked in a restaurant. I worked at a nursing home, I worked in retail, I did outside work with archaeology and forestry consulting, I did inside work in an office, just basically all over the place. Lab work at my old university. Oh my goodness, what else? A very small grocery store that was also the post office, like that kind of thing, basically, until I became a writer.
So, what inspired you to become an author? How old were you when you knew you wanted to become an author?
It's kind of a complicated answer because I never wanted to be an author. Like, I have a ton of writer friends who were like, oh, I've wanted to write stories since I was little, and I did write stories when I was little. I did a lot of what I now know is live action role play of Star Wars and the Chronicles of Narnia in my backyard, making up stories and all that kind of stuff, but I never wrote any of it down. And I wanted to be an archaeologist, and that's what I went to school for, and then I graduated, and it was a recession, which is not a good time to be an archaeologist, and I started writing books for fun. I'd written fan fiction since 2002, but I started writing books for fun in 2009, and then one of my friends was like, I think you can make this work, so I made it work.
So, are you writing a book as we speak?
As we speak, yes. I'm almost always writing a book. Actually, that's why I came to Timmins. I generally have 3 or 4 things going on at any given time. I'm in edits for 3 different books right now, and I'm starting to work on the book after that.
How long does it take to write a novel? Like, what are some of the challenges? What's the process?
It really depends how long to write a novel. Like, to draft a novel, to put that sort of first draft together, takes me about a month of sitting at the computer and typing. But I think about books for a lot longer than that. I edit books for a lot longer after that. So my first book, The Story of Owen, I got the idea for it in the spring of 2011. I wrote it in the fall of 2011, and it was published in 2014, and that's kind of fast. Usually it takes longer to sort of get from an idea to a book. And in terms of the process, I think about things for a really long time. I take notes, but not a lot. And then I go to my brother's cottage because there's no internet. If you wanna communicate, you have to send a pigeon. And I sort of write everything really quickly when there's no distractions.
On your website, it says things can get weird sometimes. What do you mean by that?
Oh my goodness, everything gets weird sometimes. I guess in terms of writing, when you sit down to write a story, even if you don't make a lot of plans, which I don't make a lot of plans, I have a general idea of where I think the book is going to go, and it almost always gets weirder than that. My most recent book was called That Inevitable Victorian Thing, and I thought that it was going to be this cute little summer romance, which lasted for about 15 pages, and then it became this very complex, totally weird book that I loved, but it's not at all what I thought I was writing when I started writing it.
Do you have any talents besides writing? What do you do outside of writing?
I hope so. So the weird thing about writing is that from 2002 until 2014, writing was the thing I did for fun. And then in 2014, writing became my job. And in 2015, it became my only job. And in the 3 years since then, I haven't come up with another hobby, but I probably should. I like baking. I'm a decent cupcake decorator. And I like travel. And I like putting together Lego sets, which I decided to do instead of teaching myself to knit because I figured it costs about the same. Knitting is expensive. I think people who are like, I'll just learn to knit don't realize how expensive knitting is.
Who is your favorite author?
Oh gosh, that's always a weird answer because so many of my friends are authors now. So I'm always like, do I pick one of my friends or do I pick a dead person? And it turns out that it's a very long list of people whose books I really like. But I think one of the people whose careers I admire the most is Anne McCaffrey. She wrote science fiction when it was kind of rough for women writing science fiction. And she was very unapologetic about it. And she made everybody like her because she was hugely popular. And then more importantly, as culture changed and what was acceptable in terms of tropes and representation changed, she also updated her writing style. So she wasn't one of those people who was like, the way we did it in the 80s was fine. She just kind of kept evolving throughout her career, which is fantastic.
What would you say your favorite book by her is?
Oh my goodness. She has like this massive series called The Dragon Riders of Pern, which is probably her most famous series. But my favorite series of hers is called, oh my goodness, I don't remember what the series is called. But the first book is called The Powers That Be, and it's about Selkies in space. Which sounds ridiculous, but it's amazing.
What do you say your primary influence outside of literature is?
Television, without a doubt, and movies, specifically Star Wars, but also Star Trek, and Road to Avonlea, which I realize is like an odd combination, but they all deal with like family and growing up and that kind of stuff, so I think it's kind of a logical sort of thing to put together.
Do you have any tips for people who want to become an author?
If you want to become an author, there's three things I highly recommend. One is read a lot. Like, read books you like, read books you don't like. Try to figure out what works in books and what doesn't work in books, and what works for you in books, basically. So just read everything. Two is you have to be able to finish projects. So I talk to a lot of young writers who are like, oh, I want to write, but I only have the first 10 pages. I'm like, well, that's really good. You need like another 200 pages or so, and then you will have a book. And then you can fix the book, but you can't fix it if it's not done. Like, you can't fix 10 pages of an idea. You can fix 250 pages of an idea. And the third thing I recommend is to ignore all writing advice if it doesn't work for you. There are a lot of people who will say like, oh, you have to write every day. Not true. There are a lot of people that will say, oh, you can only write what you know. Also not true. I recommend writing what you're willing to know a lot about, but generally speaking, there's not a lot of hard and fast writing advice.
You're a New York Times bestseller. What brings you to Timmins?
It really never gets old. New York Times bestseller. Anyway, no, the morning afterwards, my sister dropped me off at the airport, and she was like, do I have to call you this now when I introduce you? Like, this is my sister, New York Times bestselling author, E.K. Johnston. I was like, yes, also make sure it goes on my tombstone. Like, it's kind of fantastic. But yeah, so as I said earlier, I am writing a book and part of it takes place in Timmins. So I wanted to come and have a look to make sure I didn't like accidentally just write smaller Sudbury, and to sort of get an idea of what the drive up here was like, because the character is going to drive here. So to get an idea of what it's like to drive from where I grew up to here, and to look around. And tomorrow I'm going to go out and look at some plants and stuff because I need to know that for the book. And I might go back to the museum and see if they have a local history section.
Well, that's all the questions we have. Thank you for answering our questions.
Thank you for having me.